Jake Martinez wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, squinting at the massive alien freighter that had just docked at Station Omega-7. The ship was a beauty, all sleek curves and crystalline panels that caught the artificial starlight. Definitely Zephyrian design, he thought, recognizing the distinctive bioluminescent strips that pulsed along its hull like a heartbeat. "Another rush job," muttered his supervisor, Chun, as he approached with a datapad. "The Zephyrians want their cargo bay cleaned and recalibrated before they jump to the Andromeda relay. Standard contract, but they're paying triple for speed." Jake nodded, grabbing his toolkit. After 15 years working the docks of humanity's largest trade station, he'd learned that alien crews always had their quirks. The Zephyrians were generally pleasant enough, tall and graceful with their silver skin and multiple arms, but they were notorious perfectionists. Everything had to be exactly right, or they'd throw a fit that could be heard 3 sectors away. The cargo bay doors hissed open as Jake approached, releasing a wave of recycled air that carried the distinctive ozone scent of Zephyrian technology. He stepped inside, his boots echoing against the polished metal floor. The bay was enormous, easily capable of holding a small cruiser, but it appeared empty except for some scattered containers near the far wall. Jake started his inspection routine, checking the gravity generators and atmosphere processors. Everything seemed standard until he noticed something odd near the waste disposal unit. A faint scratching sound, barely audible over the hum of the ship's systems. Curious, he followed the noise to a maintenance alcove tucked behind the main cargo area. What he found there made him freeze in place. Huddled in the corner was the most pathetic creature he'd ever seen. It was roughly the size of a large dog, with pale, almost translucent skin that revealed the network of veins beneath. Its body was serpentine, but with 4 stubby legs and small, useless-looking wings. Most striking were its eyes, large, milky white orbs that seemed to glow with an inner light. The creature looked up at him and made a soft, mewling sound that tugged at something deep in Jake's chest. It was clearly young, maybe even a baby, and it was shivering despite the controlled temperature of the cargo bay. "What the hell?" Jake whispered, crouching down slowly. The creature didn't try to run or attack. Instead, it crawled closer, pressing its warm body against his leg with obvious desperation. Jake had seen a lot of alien species in his time on the station, but this was something new. The creature's features reminded him of the dragons from old Earth mythology, but there was something distinctly alien about its proportions and the way its skin seemed to shimmer in the light. A sound from the cargo bay entrance made him look up. Captain Veltar, the Zephyrian commander, stood silhouetted in the doorway with 2 of his crew members. The alien's silver features were twisted in an expression Jake had learned to recognize as disgust. "Human worker," Veltar called out in accented but clear standard. "Have you completed your inspection?" Jake glanced down at the creature, which had pressed itself even closer to him, as if sensing danger. Something in the captain's tone set off warning bells in his mind. "Almost finished," Jake replied, standing slowly. "Just checking the waste systems." Veltar and his crew approached, and Jake saw the captain's multiple eyes fix on the creature with unmistakable hatred. "Ah, you have found our refuse. We had hoped it would have died during the journey, but the cursed thing clings to life like a parasite." "Refuse." Jake felt his anger rising. "This is a living creature. It is an abomination," Veltar spat. "A genetic failure that should never have been allowed to hatch. We are disposing of it according to proper protocols." Jake looked down at the creature, which was now trembling violently. Its large eyes seemed to understand what was being discussed, and Jake could swear he saw intelligence there, and fear. "What species is it?" he asked, stalling for time while his mind raced. "It is what you humans might call a dragon," Veltar replied with obvious reluctance. "We Zephyrians have been their guardians for millennia, but this one," he gestured dismissively. "It lacks pigmentation, proper wing development, and, most importantly, the ability to bond with its handlers. It is useless." Jake felt something click in his understanding. The creature was albino, which explained its pale coloring and unusual eyes. Among many species, such genetic variations were often considered omens or defects, depending on cultural beliefs. So, you just gonna dump it here? We were going to dispose of it in space, Veltar said coldly. But the waste processing unit here will serve just as well. The creature will be recycled into useful components. The casual cruelty in the alien's voice made Jake's hands clench into fists. He'd heard rumors about how some alien cultures treated genetic variants, but seeing it firsthand was different. The creature at his feet wasn't asking for much, just a chance to live. Actually, Jake said, his mind racing as he formulated a plan, there might be a problem with using the waste processor. We've had contamination issues with organic matter from off-world species. Station regulations require all biological waste to go through special quarantine procedures. Veltar's expression shifted to one of irritation. How long would such procedures take? Could be weeks. Jake lied smoothly. Depends on the xenobiology department's backlog. But I might be able to help you out. I could take personal responsibility for disposal through the proper channels. The Zephyrian captain considered this, his silver features reflecting the cargo bay's lights, as he thought. Jake could see the wheels turning. The alien wanted the creature gone, but didn't want to deal with bureaucratic delays. Very well, Veltar finally agreed. But I want documentation that the abomination has been properly disposed of, and there will be no mention of Zephyrian involvement in this matter. Of course, Jake agreed, trying to keep the relief out of his voice. I'll handle all the paperwork. Veltar and his crew departed without another word, leaving Jake alone with the creature. He waited until he was sure they were gone before kneeling down again. Well, little guy, he said softly, looks like you're stuck with me now. The creature, the dragon, he corrected himself, looked up at him with those strange, luminous eyes. Jake reached out slowly, half expecting it to bite or flee, but instead it pressed its snout into his palm. Its skin was warm and surprisingly soft, with a texture like fine suede. Jake had always been good with animals. Growing up on a farm on New Montana, he'd raised everything from cattle to the exotic cloud riders that his family bred for the tourism industry. But this was different. As the dragon nuzzled his hand, he felt something he'd never experienced before, a faint tingling sensation, as if electricity was flowing between them. "You're not defective," he murmured, gently stroking the creature's head. "You're just different." The dragon made that soft mewling sound again, and Jake could swear it was responding to his words. Intelligence definitely shone in those pale eyes, along with something else, hope. Getting the dragon off the ship proved easier than expected. Jake simply tucked it inside his equipment bag, where it curled up without complaint. The creature seemed to understand that stealth was necessary, remaining perfectly still as Jake carried it through the station's corridors. His apartment was small, but comfortable, located in the civilian sector near the docks. Jake had lived alone for most of his time on the station, preferring the company of machines to most people. But as he set the dragon down in his living room, he realized how quiet and empty his life had become. The dragon immediately began exploring, sniffing at furniture and walls with obvious curiosity. Its movements were clumsy but determined, and Jake noticed that its wings, while small, were perfectly formed. Maybe they would grow as the creature matured. "First things first," Jake said aloud. "You need food and water." The dragon's head snapped toward him at the sound of his voice, those large eyes focusing intently on his face. Jake had the unsettling feeling that it understood more than it should. A quick search of his kitchen revealed precious little that might be suitable dragon food. He had some synthesized protein bars and a few real fruit from his lashore leave, but he had no idea what the creature's dietary needs might be. Jake tried offering small pieces of protein bar, which the dragon sniffed but rejected. The fruit met with the same response. Growing concerned, he was about to contact the station's xenobiology department when the dragon suddenly perked up and headed toward his small balcony. The balcony faced the station's central hub, where hundreds of ships of all sizes came and went daily. But it wasn't the view that had caught the dragon's attention. It was Jake's small collection of potted plants. To his amazement, the dragon began gently nibbling on the leaves of his earth mint plant, its expression becoming noticeably more content with each bite. Herbivore, huh? Jake mused. That's not what I expected from a dragon. Over the next few hours, Jake watched as the dragon methodically sampled each of his plants, showing clear preferences for certain species over others. It particularly enjoyed the mint and basil, but avoided the decorative flowers entirely. As the station's day cycle wound down and the artificial lighting dimmed, Jake found himself sitting on his couch with the dragon curled up beside him. The creature's warmth was pleasant, and its presence somehow made the apartment feel less empty. I should probably give you a name, Jake said, gently stroking the dragon's pale scales. Can't keep calling you creature forever. The dragon looked up at him, and Jake could swear he saw expectation in those strange eyes. How about Casper? After an old Earth ghost story. You're kind of pale and mysterious. The dragon's head tilted slightly, as if considering the name. Then it pressed closer to Jake's side in what seemed like approval. Casper is then... That night, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling, while Casper slept peacefully on a makeshift bed of blankets on the floor. The dragon's breathing was soft and regular, occasionally interrupted by small sounds that might have been dreams. Jake knew he was in over his head. Keeping an alien creature on the station without proper permits was against about a dozen regulations. If security found out, he'd lose his job at best, face criminal charges at worst. But every time he considered turning Casper over to the authorities, he remembered the casual cruelty in Captain Veltar's voice. The dragon wasn't refused to be disposed of. It was a living being with thoughts and feelings, and Jake was probably the only thing standing between it and a very unpleasant death. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Jake made a decision. He would find a way to keep Casper safe, no matter what it took. The little dragon had chosen to trust him, and he wouldn't let that trust be misplaced. In his dreams, Jake saw vast spaces filled with creatures like Casper, their pale forms moving through starlit skies with impossible grace. When he woke, he could swear he felt an echo of that dream lingering at the edges of his mind, as if it hadn't been entirely his own. The next morning brought new challenges. Jake had to report to work, but he couldn't leave Casper alone in his apartment. The dragon had shown remarkable intelligence, but it was still essentially a baby in an unfamiliar environment. After some thought, Jake decided to bring Casper to work with him. The maintenance tunnels beneath the station were rarely used except by technical crews, and there were dozens of alcoves where a small dragon could hide safely. Casper seemed to understand the plan instinctively, remaining perfectly still in Jake's equipment bag during the journey to the lower levels. Once they reached a quiet maintenance area, Jake set up a temporary shelter using spare thermal blankets and left Casper with a supply of fresh mint leaves. Stay hidden, Jake instructed, though he suspected the warning was unnecessary. I'll be back to check on you during my lunch break. The dragon looked at him with those luminous eyes and made a soft chirping sound that Jake took for agreement. Work that day was routine maintenance on the station's atmosphere processors, boring but necessary tasks that Jake could perform on autopilot. His mind kept drifting to Casper, wondering how the dragon was adapting to its new environment. When lunchtime finally arrived, Jake hurried back to the maintenance area, half expecting to find Casper gone or injured. Instead, he discovered that the dragon had not only stayed put but had somehow arranged the thermal blankets into a more comfortable nest. Smart little guy, Jake murmured, offering fresh food and water. As Casper ate, Jake noticed that the dragon's pale scales seemed slightly more lustrous than they had the day before. Good nutrition was apparently making a difference already. That evening, Jake made another discovery that changed everything he thought he knew about his new companion. He was working on his personal computer, trying to research dragon species in the Galactic database, when Casper jumped onto his desk and began staring intently at the screen. At first, Jake thought the dragon was simply curious about the moving images. But then He noticed that Casper's eyes were tracking the text as it scrolled by, following the words with unmistakable comprehension. "Can you read?" Jake asked incredulously. Casper looked at him and made that soft chirping sound again, but this time Jake heard something different in it, almost like an attempt at communication. Jake pulled up a simple text file and typed, "Hello, Casper." The dragon's reaction was immediate and startling. Its pale form seemed to shimmer for a moment, and Jake felt that strange tingling sensation again, stronger this time. When it faded, Jake found himself with the oddest sensation that something had tried to speak directly into his mind. Heart racing, Jake typed another message. "Can you understand me?" This time, the mental touch was clearer. It wasn't words exactly, but rather emotions and concepts that formed into something like meaning, understanding, gratitude, fear of abandonment, hope. Jake sat back in his chair, trying to process what had just happened. Telepathy wasn't unknown among alien species, but it was rare and usually limited to members of the same race. For a human and a dragon to share any kind of mental connection was theoretically impossible. "This is incredible," he whispered. Casper's response came not as words, but as a warm feeling of agreement mixed with something that might have been pride. Over the following weeks, Jake and Casper developed their unique form of communication. The mental connection grew stronger with practice, allowing them to share not just emotions, but increasingly complex thoughts. Jake learned that Casper's species, the Zephyrian dragons, were indeed highly intelligent, traditionally serving as companions and advisors to the Zephyrian ruling class. What made Casper different wasn't just his albino coloring, but his ability to bond with non-Zephyrian minds. This trait, which his own people saw as a defect, was actually something unprecedented in galactic history. Through their growing bond, Jake began to understand the tragedy of Casper's early life. The dragon had been born into a society that valued genetic purity and traditional bonds above all else. His differences made him not just unwanted, but actively despised. The Zephyrians had planned to kill him shortly after hatching, but some lingering sense of duty had led them to simply abandon him instead. Jake's anger at this casual cruelty only grew stronger as he learned more about his companion's intelligence and gentle nature. Casper was curious about everything, eager to learn, and possessed of a moral sense that put many sentient beings to shame. The idea that such a creature had been deemed worthless made Jake's blood boil. But Casper harbored no bitterness toward his own species. Through their bond, Jake felt only sadness and a deep longing for acceptance. The dragon didn't want revenge. He simply wanted to belong somewhere. "You belong here," Jake told him one evening as they shared their usual quiet time together. "With me." The wave of happiness that flowed from Casper in response was so intense that Jake had to blink back tears. In finding the dragon, he had discovered something he hadn't even known he was missing, a true companion who understood him completely. As Casper grew stronger and more confident, Jake began to notice other changes. The dragon's mental abilities seemed to be developing rapidly, allowing him to interface with electronic systems in ways that shouldn't have been possible. More than once, Jake found Casper somehow accessing his computer or the apartment's environmental controls without any physical contact. It was during one of these incidents that Jake realized the true significance of what was happening. Casper wasn't just learning to use technology. He was evolving, developing capabilities that his own species had never possessed. The genetic differences that made him an outcast among the Zephyrians were actually making him something entirely new. Jake began to wonder if Casper's abandonment had been fate rather than tragedy. Among the Zephyrians, the dragon's abilities would have been suppressed or destroyed. But here, with a human who accepted and encouraged his differences, Casper was free to become whatever he was meant to be. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. If Casper continued to develop at his current rate, he would soon possess capabilities that exceeded those of any known species. Jake had rescued what he thought was an abandoned baby, but he was beginning to suspect he had found something far more significant, possibly the next step in draconic evolution. As he watched Casper sleep peacefully on his makeshift bed, Jake made a silent promise. Whatever his companion became, wherever this journey led them, he would be there to support and protect him. The Zephyrians had thrown away something precious, but Jake would make sure their loss became humanity's gain. The little albino dragon had already changed his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. Jake had a feeling they were just getting started. 3 months had passed since Jake first found Casper, and the dragon had grown considerably. What started as a creature the size of a large dog was now closer to a small horse, though still possessing the same pale, ethereal beauty that had first caught Jake's attention. His wings, once stubby and seemingly useless, had developed into impressive appendages that he could use for short gliding flights around Jake's apartment. But the most remarkable changes weren't physical. Casper's mental abilities had expanded exponentially, and their telepathic connection had evolved into something Jake was beginning to suspect was unprecedented in galactic history. They could now share not just emotions and simple concepts, but complete thoughts, memories, and even sensory experiences. Jake discovered this new depth to their bond during a routine maintenance job on the station's main computer core. He was working deep in the system's neural pathways when he felt Casper's consciousness brush against his mind with unusual urgency. The sensation was different from their normal communication. Instead of the warm, fuzzy feeling of shared emotions, this felt like Casper was trying to show him something specific. Jake paused in his work, opening his mind fully to the connection. Suddenly, he wasn't seeing through his own eyes anymore. He was experiencing the station's computer network through Casper's perception, watching data streams flow like rivers of light through crystalline pathways. The dragon was somehow interfacing directly with the station's systems, reading information flows with an ease that should have been impossible. "Casper," Jake whispered, awed by what he was witnessing. "How are you doing this?" The answer came not in words, but in a flood of understanding that left Jake momentarily breathless. Casper wasn't just reading the computer systems. He was communing with them, treating the electronic networks like living entities to be understood rather than tools to be used. It was a completely alien way of thinking that nonetheless felt perfectly natural through their shared consciousness. Through Casper's enhanced perception, Jake began to see patterns in the station's data that he'd never noticed before. Inefficiencies in power distribution, communication bottlenecks, even potential security vulnerabilities became crystal clear. The dragon's unique perspective was revealing problems that the station's own diagnostic systems had missed. "We need to be careful," Jake warned, pulling his consciousness back to his own body. "If the station AI detects unauthorized access." But Casper's response surprised him. The dragon's touch on the computer systems wasn't being detected as unauthorized because it wasn't being recognized as access at all. Somehow, Casper's mental signature was registering as a natural part of the system's own processes. This discovery opened up possibilities that both thrilled and terrified Jake. If Casper could interface with computer systems without detection, there was virtually no limit to what he could accomplish. But such abilities would also make him incredibly valuable to the wrong people, and Jake was all too aware of how various galactic governments and corporations might want to exploit such a unique creature. Jake's concerns proved justified sooner than he'd feared. 2 weeks later, he was approached by Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief xenobiologist, while grabbing lunch at the cafeteria. "Jake Martinez, isn't it?" Dr. Vasquez sat down across from him without invitation, her dark eyes studying his face intently. "We haven't been formally introduced, but I've been hearing interesting things about you." Jake's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "Just a mechanic, Doc. Don't know what would be interesting about that." "Oh, but you're much more than just a mechanic," Dr. Vasquez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're the man who's been making unauthorized biological disposals without going through proper quarantine procedures." Jake's mind raced. Somehow, she knew about Casper. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." 3 months ago, you signed paperwork claiming responsibility for disposing of biological waste from a Zephyrian vessel. But there's no record of any such waste being processed through our systems. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward slightly. That's a serious violation of station health and safety protocols. Maybe there was a paperwork error, Jake suggested weakly. Maybe. Or maybe you decided to keep something you shouldn't have. Her smile became predatory. Would you mind if I conducted an inspection of your quarters? Just to clear up any misunderstanding. Jake knew he was trapped. If he refused, it would only confirm her suspicions. If he agreed, she would find Casper, and Jake had no doubt what would happen then. The dragon would become a test subject, poked and prodded and studied until his unique abilities were fully understood and exploited. Of course, Jake said, standing up. I've got nothing to hide. Dr. Vasquez's smile widened. Excellent. Shall we say this afternoon? Around 1400 hours. Jake nodded and walked away, his mind already racing through possible escape plans. He had perhaps 4 hours before Dr. Vasquez arrived at his quarters. 4 hours to figure out how to protect Casper from a fate that might be worse than what the Zephyrians had planned for him. When Jake reached his apartment, he found Casper waiting for him with obvious anxiety. The dragon had felt his distress through their bond and was already aware that something was seriously wrong. We have a problem, Jake said aloud, though he knew Casper could read the details directly from his mind. Dr. Vasquez knows about you. The response that flowed back through their connection was complex, fear, yes, but also determination and something that surprised Jake, protective anger. Casper wasn't just worried about his own fate. He was concerned about what might happen to Jake for harboring him. Don't worry about me, Jake said, kneeling down to wrap his arms around the dragon's neck. We just need to find somewhere safe for you to hide. But even as he said it, Jake knew it was hopeless. The station wasn't that large, and Dr. Vasquez would have access to security scanners and thermal imaging. There was nowhere on Omega 7 that Casper could hide indefinitely. It was Casper who provided the solution, his consciousness touching Jake's mind with an idea so audacious that Jake's first instinct was to reject it outright. Absolutely not, Jake said aloud. It's too dangerous. Casper's response was patient but firm. Through their bond, he shared his understanding of the station's computer systems, showing Jake pathways and protocols that could be exploited. The dragon's plan was risky, but it just might work. If we're caught, they'll space both of us, Jake warned. Casper's mental touch conveyed amused confidence. They wouldn't be caught because they wouldn't be there to catch. Jake spent the next 2 hours helping Casper prepare for the most audacious hack in the station's history. Using his unique ability to interface with computer systems, the dragon was going to temporarily take control of the station's entire network, creating false records, redirecting security protocols, and essentially making himself and Jake disappear from all official monitoring. The plan required split-second timing and perfect coordination between them. Jake would have to be physically present when Dr. Vasquez arrived, acting natural while Casper worked his technological magic from the maintenance tunnels below. If everything went perfectly, the inspection would show nothing but standard quarters occupied by a boring human mechanic. At exactly 1400 hours, Dr. Vasquez arrived at Jake's door with 2 security officers in tow. Jake let them in with what he hoped looked like confused cooperation. As I said, Doc, I'm not sure what you're looking for, Jake said, gesturing around his quarters. Feel free to scan whatever you want. Dr. Vasquez activated a sophisticated bioscanner, sweeping it slowly through the apartment. Jake held his breath, knowing that if Casper's technological intervention failed, the scanner would detect traces of dragon DNA throughout the living space. The scanner beeped softly as it completed its sweep. Dr. Vasquez frowned at the readout, ran it again, then checked the device's calibration. Interesting, she murmured. I'm reading elevated levels of nitrogen and trace organic compounds consistent with exotic plant life, but nothing that suggests large animal habitation. Jake silently thanked his extensive collection of earth plants, which Casper had suggested leaving in place to mask any remaining biological traces. "I grow herbs," Jake explained. "Reminds me of home." The inspection continued for another 30 minutes, with Dr. Vasquez becoming increasingly frustrated as her sophisticated equipment failed to detect any evidence of unauthorized biological specimens. Finally, she called off the search. "My apologies, Mr. Martinez," she said stiffly. "It appears there may have been an error in our records after all." After she left, Jake waited another hour before making his way to the maintenance tunnels where Casper was hiding. He found the dragon in a state of exhaustion, the strain of manipulating the station's systems for so long having taken its toll. "You did it," Jake said, gently stroking Casper's pale scales. "But we can't keep this up forever. She's going to be watching us now." Through their bond, Casper shared his agreement, along with something else, a sense that their time on the station was coming to an end. The dragon had seen things in the computer systems during his hack, patterns of data that suggested their secret was already compromised in ways they didn't yet understand. Over the next few days, Jake began to notice subtle changes in how others treated him. Casual conversations with coworkers became stilted and awkward. His supervisor started assigning him to isolated work areas, away from sensitive systems. Security scans at checkpoints took just a little longer than usual. Dr. Vasquez hadn't given up her investigation. She'd simply become more subtle about it. The situation came to a head when Jake intercepted a classified communication while performing routine maintenance on the station's communication array. The message was from Dr. Vasquez to someone identified only as Director Chun at something called the Galactic Xenobiological Research Consortium. The content made Jake's blood run cold. Dr. Vasquez was requesting authorization to use enhanced interrogation techniques on a station resident she suspected of harboring an undocumented alien specimen with unprecedented neurological capabilities. The reply authorized her to use any means necessary to acquire the specimen for immediate transport to a classified research facility. Jake realized they were out of time. Within days, possibly hours, Dr. Vasquez would move against them with far more resources than a simple inspection team. Jake and Casper needed to leave the station, but where could they go? Jake's savings could buy passage on a civilian transport, but passenger ships required identification and documentation that would lead their pursuers right to them. Once again, it was Casper who provided the solution. Through their bond, he shared memories of the various ships that docked at the station, focusing on one in particular, an ancient human cargo freighter called the Stellar Wanderer. The ship's captain, Marcus Webb, was known for asking few questions as long as the payment was good and the cargo wasn't actively shooting at him. More importantly, Casper had detected something interesting about the ship during his previous computer infiltrations. The Stellar Wanderer's navigation computer contained records of dozens of uninhabited star systems, places where a man and his dragon could disappear completely. "It's a big galaxy," Jake murmured, reading Casper's thoughts. "Plenty of room for a couple of refugees. But first, they had to reach the ship without being detected." Dr. Vasquez had undoubtedly placed monitors on Jake's quarters and work assignments. Any deviation from his normal routine would trigger immediate investigation. Casper's solution was characteristically elegant. Using his ability to interface with the station's systems, he began creating a series of minor, but urgent technical problems throughout the maintenance sector. Nothing dangerous, just enough to keep Jake legitimately busy while providing cover for their real activities. Over the course of 3 days, Jake gradually moved supplies and equipment to various hiding spots near the docking bay where the Stellar Wanderer was berthed. Meanwhile, Casper worked to identify and neutralize the surveillance systems that Dr. Vasquez had placed around Jake's quarters. The plan called for them to make their move during the station's night cycle, when most of the corridors would be empty and security would be operating with minimal crews. Jake would supposedly be responding to an emergency maintenance call while actually making his way to the ship with Casper, hidden in his equipment transport. Everything went smoothly until they were 50 meters from the Stellar Wanderer's airlock. That's when the lights came up and Dr. Vasquez stepped out from behind a cargo container, flanked by a full security team. "Going somewhere, Mr. Martinez?" she asked, her voice filled with satisfaction. "And what's in the transport container?" "More maintenance equipment." Jake's heart sank as he realized they'd been outmaneuvered. Dr. Vasquez had anticipated their escape attempt and set a trap. There was no way out of the docking bay that wasn't blocked by armed security personnel. But Casper had one more surprise in store for everyone. The dragon's consciousness suddenly expanded through their bond, and Jake felt his companion's mind reaching out to touch every electronic system in the docking bay. Emergency lights began flashing, gravity generators fluctuated, and the massive bay doors started cycling through their opening sequence. In the chaos that followed, Jake felt more than saw Casper emerge from the transport container. But the creature that revealed itself was not the gentle dragon Jake had been hiding for months. This Casper blazed with an inner light that made his pale scales look like living starfire. His eyes had become orbs of pure energy, and when he spread his wings, they seemed to span the entire docking bay. Dr. Vasquez and her security team fell back in shock and terror as Casper rose into the air, his very presence causing their electronic equipment to spark and malfunction. When he spoke, it wasn't through the bond he shared with Jake, but directly into the minds of everyone present. "I am not property to be studied or specimen to be dissected." Casper's mental voice resonated with power that made seasoned security officers fall to their knees. "I'm the first of my kind, and I choose my own path." The transformed dragon turned his burning gaze to Jake, and suddenly, the harsh light softened back into the warm, familiar presence Jake knew so well. "Come, my friend. It is time to see what lies beyond the edges of known space." Jake didn't hesitate. He ran toward Casper, feeling strong dragon claws gently grasp his shoulders as they rose together toward the still opening bay doors. Behind them, Dr. Vasquez screamed orders to her paralyzed team, but her words were lost in the rush of atmosphere as the docking bay opened to the void. As they emerged into space, Jake felt Casper's power enveloping them both in a protective field that shouldn't have been possible. The dragon was flying through hard vacuum as if it were air, carrying Jake safely in his grasp while they soared away from Station Omega 7. "Where are we going?" Jake asked through their bond, though he found he wasn't really afraid. Whatever Casper had become, he was still the same loyal companion who had pressed against Jake's leg that first day in the cargo bay. Casper's response came filled with excitement and possibility. They were going to find others like him, dragons who had been cast out by their own people for being different. They were going to build something new, something that had never existed before, a place where being unique was a strength rather than a weakness. As Station Omega 7 dwindled behind them and the stars beckoned ahead, Jake realized that his quiet life as a mechanic was truly over. He had become part of something larger, something that would change the galaxy forever. The little albino dragon he had rescued had saved him in return, giving him a purpose he'd never known he needed. Behind them, Dr. Vasquez watched through the docking bay's reinforced windows as man and dragon disappeared into the star-filled darkness. She was already composing her report to the consortium, a document that would set in motion events beyond her imagination. The age of the free dragons had begun. 6 months after their dramatic escape from Station Omega 7, Jake Martinez stood on the observation deck of what had once been a derelict mining station in the Kepler Nebula. Now, the ancient structure hummed with new life and purpose, transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, the first free haven for outcast dragons and their human companions. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. When Jake and Casper first arrived at the abandoned facility, it had been little more than a shell drifting in space, its atmosphere long since leaked away and its systems dark for decades. But Casper's evolved abilities, combined with Jake's mechanical expertise, had brought it back to life in ways that defied conventional understanding. "The atmosphere processors are running at 96% efficiency," reported Sarah Chun, Jake's former supervisor who had surprised everyone by showing up 3 weeks ago with her own dragon companion. Better than most active stations. Jake nodded, watching through the reinforced windows as more ships approached the station. Word had spread through the galaxy's underground networks about the sanctuary they were building, and every week brought new arrivals, dragons fleeing persecution and humans willing to risk everything to protect them. Any word from the scouting teams? Jake asked. Team 7 found another group yesterday, Sarah replied, consulting her datapad. 12 dragons and 6 humans hiding in an asteroid field near the Rigel system. They should arrive tomorrow. Jake felt a familiar warmth in his mind as Casper's consciousness touched his own. The dragon was currently interfaced with the station's main computer core, using his unique abilities to coordinate the complex logistics of their growing community. Through their bond, Jake could sense his companion's satisfaction with their progress, tempered by concerns about the future. The challenges they faced were significant. Their community now numbered nearly 200 beings, dragons and humans working together in ways that had never existed before. They had limited resources, no official recognition from any galactic government, and a growing list of enemies who saw them as a threat to the established order. Chief among those enemies was the Galactic Xenobiological Research Consortium, led by Dr. Elena Vasquez. In the months since Jake and Casper's escape, the consortium had launched an aggressive campaign to locate and capture what they termed aberrant draconic specimens. Several of their people had been captured by consortium forces, though rescue missions had managed to free most of them. Jake, you need to see this, called out Dr. Maria Santos, the xenobiologist who had defected from the consortium after witnessing their treatment of captured dragons. She was standing at the communication station, her face pale with concern. Jake hurried over, with Sarah close behind. On the monitor was a decoded transmission from deep space, a message from Captain Veltar of the Zephyrian fleet. To the human known as Jake Martinez and the abomination he protects, the Zephyrian captain's translated words appeared on screen. You have violated the natural order and corrupted others with your poison. The Zephyrian Empire demands the immediate surrender of all stolen property. You have 7 standard days to comply, or we will take what is ours by force. Jake felt his blood chill. The Zephyrians had found them, and they weren't coming just for Casper anymore. In their minds, every dragon in the sanctuary was their property, to be reclaimed or destroyed as they saw fit. How many ships? Jake asked. Dr. Santos adjusted the display, showing sensor readings that made Jake's heart sink. At least 30 vessels, including 3 heavy cruisers. They'll be here in 4 days. Sarah let out a low whistle. That's enough firepower to reduce this station to scrap metal in minutes. Jake closed his eyes, feeling Casper's presence grow stronger in his mind as the dragon sensed his distress. Through their bond, he could feel similar connections spreading throughout the station as other human-dragon pairs shared the news telepathically. Within minutes, the entire community would know what they were facing. We need to evacuate, Dr. Santos said. Get everyone onto transports and scatter across the galaxy. It's our only chance. But Jake was already shaking his head. Where would we go? The Zephyrians will hunt us down individually, and the consortium is offering bounties for captured dragons. There's nowhere left to run. Through the mental link he shared with Casper, Jake felt his companion's thoughts turning in a different direction. The dragon was reaching out through the station's communication systems, touching minds across vast distances of space. Slowly, a new understanding began to form. Casper has an idea, Jake announced, opening his mind fully to their bond. What he experienced next left him staggered. Through Casper's enhanced senses, Jake could perceive the true scope of what they had built. The sanctuary wasn't just a single station in space. It was the center of a vast network of consciousness that spanned multiple star systems. Every dragon they had rescued, every human who had joined their cause, was connected through bonds similar to what he shared with Casper. But more than that, Jake could sense other presences in the network. Alien minds that were neither dragon nor human, but something else entirely. ancient intelligences that had been watching their experiment with great interest. The ethereals, Dr. Santos gasped, reading the translated data streaming across her screen. The machine intelligences from beyond the galactic rim. They're actually communicating with us. Jake had heard legends of ethereals, mysterious beings of pure energy who were said to have transcended physical form millions of years ago. Most xenobiologists considered them myth, but the evidence was right there in front of them. Through Casper's connection, one of the ethereal minds touched Jake's consciousness directly. The contact was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Vast, ancient, and filled with curiosity about the unique bonds being forged between humans and dragons. The message that flowed into his mind was complex, layered with concepts that barely translated into human understanding. But the essential meaning was clear. The ethereals had been observing the development of the human-dragon partnerships with fascination. They saw in these bonds the potential for something new, a hybrid form of consciousness that combined biological intuition with technological capability. More importantly, they were offering help. They're giving us access to their technology, Jake announced, his voice filled with awe. Defensive systems that are thousands of years beyond anything the Zephyrians have. But the ethereal's assistance came with a condition. They wanted to study the human-dragon bonds more closely to understand how two such different species could achieve true telepathic integration. In exchange for protection, the sanctuary would become a research station where ethereals could observe and interact with their unique community. It's not exactly what we planned, Sarah observed after Jake explained the offer. But it beats getting blown up by Zephyrian warships. The decision was put to the entire community, with dragons and humans deliberating together through their telepathic network. The debate was intense, with some arguing that accepting ethereal help would merely trade one form of dependence for another. But in the end, the choice was unanimous. They would accept the alliance. What happened next defied every principle of known physics. The station itself began to change, its hull reshaping as ethereal technology integrated with the existing structure. New defensive systems materialized from pure energy, while the facility size increased dramatically to accommodate both current residents and anticipated growth. When the transformation was complete, the sanctuary had become something unprecedented, a hybrid of biological, technological, and energy-based systems that existed partially outside normal space-time. It was simultaneously a space station, a research facility, and a nexus point for consciousness itself. The Zephyrian fleet arrived exactly when predicted, their ships dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Captain Veltar immediately broadcast a demand for surrender, followed by threats of immediate destruction if his terms weren't met. Jake stood on the command deck, watching the enemy ships through sensors that could perceive far more than simple visible light. Beside him, Casper had taken his fully evolved form, his pale scales now crackling with energy that bridged the gap between matter and thought. "Open a channel," Jake ordered. Captain Veltar's image appeared on the main screen, his silver features twisted with familiar hatred. "Human, you have one chance to surrender the stolen property and submit yourself for judgment." "Those dragons aren't property," Jake replied calmly. "They're free beings who chose their own path. And this station is under ethereal protection." The Zephyrian captain laughed harshly. "The ethereals are legends, human. Your lies will not save you from justice." That's when the station's new defensive systems activated. Jake had expected weapons, force fields, or other conventional military technology. Instead, what the ethereals provided was something far more sophisticated, a demonstration of power that left the Zephyrian fleet paralyzed with awe and terror. Space around the station began to fold in on itself, creating visual effects that hurt to look at directly. The Zephyrian ships found themselves caught in gravitational anomalies that held them motionless while not causing any actual damage. Their weapons powered down spontaneously. Their navigation systems began displaying star charts of galaxies that didn't exist, and their communication arrays started receiving transmission from civilizations that had died out millions of years ago. Through the station's enhanced sensors, Jake watched as the crews of the Zephyrian ships fell to their knees in terror and worship. They were experiencing direct contact with minds so advanced that the very touch of ethereal consciousness was rewriting their understanding of reality. Captain Veltar's image flickered as a ship's systems struggled to maintain contact. When the transmission cleared, the Zephyrian captain's expression had completely changed. The hatred was gone, replaced by something that might have been religious reverence. The ethereals, Veltar whispered. They are real, and they speak for the abominations. They speak for freedom, Jake corrected, for the right of all conscious beings to choose their own destiny. The Zephyrian captain looked at Jake for a long moment, then slowly bowed his head. We withdraw our claim. The outcasts are yours to protect. As quickly as they had arrived, the Zephyrian ships departed, their crews forever changed by their encounter with intelligence beyond their comprehension. In the months that followed, the sanctuary grew into something beyond Jake's wildest dreams. The alliance with the ethereals brought not just protection, but knowledge and technology that accelerated their development exponentially. Dragons and humans worked together to explore forms of consciousness that had never existed before, while the ethereals studied their unique bonds with fascination. Other species began to take notice. Delegations arrived from across the galaxy, some seeking alliance, others simply trying to understand what was happening in the Kepler Nebula. The sanctuary became a diplomatic center where traditional enemies found common ground through shared wonder at the human-dragon partnerships. Dr. Vasquez and the consortium made several attempts to infiltrate or attack the sanctuary, but their conventional technology was useless against ethereal defenses. Eventually, even they were forced to acknowledge that their age of controlling and exploiting unique beings was coming to an end. Jake often found himself standing on the observation deck, watching ships from dozens of species dock at what had become known as the Haven of Bonds. Dragons flew freely through the station's vast chambers, their human companions working alongside them on projects that pushed the boundaries of science, philosophy, and consciousness itself. Any regrets? Casper asked one evening, his mental voice warm with affection and pride. Jake considered the question seriously. He had given up his quiet life as a mechanic, become a target for multiple galactic governments, and found himself at the center of changes that would reshape civilization itself. His days were filled with responsibilities he had never wanted and challenges that would have terrified his younger self. Not one, he replied, reaching out to touch Casper's pale scales. This is what we were meant to do. Through their bond, Jake could feel Casper's agreement, along with something else, glimpses of futures yet to come. He saw new forms of consciousness emerging from the partnership between organic and digital minds. He saw dragons and humans working together to explore galaxies beyond the reach of conventional technology. He saw the barriers between species breaking down as telepathic bonds spread throughout the galaxy. Most importantly, he saw hope, for outcasts finding homes, for differences being celebrated rather than feared, and for the endless possibilities that emerged when beings chose cooperation over conflict. The little albino dragon that had been thrown away as worthless had become the catalyst for a new age. And the human mechanic who had refused to let cruelty stand unchallenged had found his true calling in the vast darkness between the stars. Behind them, the ethereal intelligence that had first contacted their network pulsed with satisfaction. The experiment was succeeding beyond their most optimistic projections. Organic consciousness was proving capable of evolution they had thought impossible, creating hybrid forms of awareness that bridged the gap between matter and energy. The future was unwritten, filled with infinite potential for growth and discovery. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Jake had learned in a cargo bay months ago, that sometimes the most valuable things in the universe are the ones that others throw away. As new ships arrived daily at the Haven of Bonds, bringing more outcasts seeking refuge and allies offering friendship. Jake knew that their story was just beginning. They had proven that different didn't mean lesser, that bonds of choice were stronger than bonds of tradition, and that the galaxy was vast enough for everyone to find their place among the stars. The age of the free dragons had become the age of free consciousness itself, and the universe would never be the same.